We continue to get political reaction to these developments, and we're joined now by the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. Mr. Steenhuisen, good morning. Thanks for speaking to us here on Morning Live. So your immediate reaction to the latest developments?
Thanks very much, Sakina, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you, and good morning to the viewers. I think that I'm delighted that we were able to avoid a violent scene taking out there. I'm glad that good sense prevailed and that the former president agreed to hand himself over and did so, and has now met the deadline. I think if we not met that deadline, South Africa would have been in very, very difficult waters. I think we would have been in a full-blown constitutional crisis, because you cannot have an order of the highest court in the land being disobeyed, and those responsible for the instruction not carrying it out. That would have left us in a precarious position. So I'm very glad that the rule of law has prevailed, and that Mr. Zuma did the responsible thing and handed himself over. Should have happened on Sunday, but nonetheless, the order of the court is upheld, and I think that that is a good thing.
Some would say, of course, sending the former president to this imprisonment term of 15 months sends out a very strong message. But more broadly speaking, on the political front, what sort of message do you think this sends?
Well, I think it's an important message, as I said last week when the Constitutional Court made its finding, that there is equality before the law in South Africa, that it doesn't matter if you're a former president or an ordinary citizen. The law will catch up with you eventually if you break the law. I think it also sends a very strong message that the courts and justice will not be mocked. I think Mr. Zuma spent a number of months making derogatory comments about the Constitutional Court, making spurious allegations against the justices and various other members of the judiciary. And I think this sends out a very, very strong message that the law won't be mocked in South Africa, and that it will be applied. I mean, we have to have that. We have to be a law and rules-based society. Otherwise, you descend into chaos. I'm still very concerned about the scenes outside in Kandla over the weekend, and I'm very concerned about the unprecedented and frankly bizarre letter addressed by the police minister and the police commissioner to the Apex Court, essentially second-guessing their judgment. But those are matters which can now be dealt with by Parliament, as they must. And there must be accountability for those. But I think that, while I'm sure it's not very nice for Mr. Zuma's family, I think in terms of the broader context of it being a rules-based society in South Africa, it's certainly a welcome development.
And just finally, in speaking of the messages being sent out, all being equal before the law and the courts not to be mocked, what would you like to see unfold next in terms of accountability, people being held accountable for wrongdoings?
Yeah. Well, I think that this must be the start. I mean, remember, Mr. Zuma's still got a long road ahead of him, Sakina. He's still got to face the 783 charges of fraud, corruption and racketeering that we've spent the last decade ensuring he answers for. And there's still that road ahead of him. He's got this rescission application on Monday. It's going to be very difficult to see how the Constitutional Court would overturn a judgment that took them 3 months to arrive at. But I think there are many others in South Africa that also need to be wearing orange overalls. And I think the wheel of justice moves slowly, but it does move. And I think we're starting to see that in South Africa. And I think there must be some senior politicians in the governing party who are looking at events of the last 48 hours with some concern, because if the kingpin can end up behind bars, then it's going to be a matter of time, hopefully, if we can keep this resolved, before all of those responsible for state capture and the absolute misery and suffering that they've caused for the 30 million poor South Africans, I think that they must be quite concerned.
So when you say senior figures in government, who are some of those?
Well, I think that it's very obvious what's coming out of the Zondo Commission. I think we've got Mr. Ace Magashule. I think there's many of those responsible, the architects of state capture that still sit on the benches of Parliament, people who leaked cabinet secrets to the Guptas, people who received the Guptas' largesse, people who received money from government tenderers to buy jeeps and all that sort of thing. There's no shortage of people in the governing party and on the benches of Parliament who need to face justice. They cannot simply walk away from this last decade that, as I said, it's essentially robbed poor South Africans of opportunities and advancement, because corruption is not a victimless crime. There are victims, and the victims in South Africa are the 30 million poor South Africans who live in poverty and have had their opportunities and futures robbed by predatory politicians who put themselves above the people.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your time this morning. John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, with reaction to the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma.